She was formerly diplomat with Singapore's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and worked as a manager for US-ASEAN Business Council. We're delighted that she could join us this afternoon on very short notice and have her introduce our keynote speaker and moderate the panel. So thank you so much, Angeline.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Before I introduce Ernie, I would like to just express on both our behalves the sympathies and solidarity with you guys for the tragic events of yesterday. And thank you also for being here today. The interest in ASEAN has increased tremendously in this city over the last couple of years. And Ernie has been in a good position to influence and help increase that interest, and for that, people who watch ASEAN in this city are very grateful to him. He's been in two positions where he has had an opportunity to influence that, and one of it is when he was the president at the US-ASEAN Business Council for 10 years until 2004. And the US-ASEAN Business Council, as some of you might know, is a private business association that helps create an even playing field for US businesses in Southeast Asia. The second position in which Ernie influenced the increase of interest in the city for ASEAN is when he was senior advisor and director for the Southeast Asia program at CSIS. And he was there from 2009 to 2016. In that capacity, Ernie offered policy inputs to making US policy towards the ASEAN region. And he also did many interviews and helped many US businesses in the region as well. And currently, Ernie is the president and CEO of BowerGroupAsia. And with that, help me to welcome Ernie Bower.
Well, Angeline, thank you very much for the word of condolence. I want to share that. I'm sorry about what happened yesterday, and I'm sure you guys know some of your bosses were there and some of your colleagues were there, and I feel really bad about it. It's strange times that we live in, but what I'd like to do today is pivot to talking about Southeast Asia, specifically ASEAN. And I want to be clear that ASEAN is an acronym for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. I've actually talked about ASEAN in the past, and somebody came up afterward and said, "Great speech, but you spelled Asian wrong." So, sorry about that. Should have been more clear. But the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, as those of you who have been attending the speaker series know, was formed in 1967 in Bangkok, and at the time it consisted of 5 countries: Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and the Philippines. And it was created mainly as a bulwark against the spread of, the fear of the spread of communism from then Vietnam. If you remember, the Vietnam War was on its way at that point, and the 5 countries got together to find a unified stance with encouragement from friends like the United States. Since then, ASEAN has grown to a 10-country grouping. It is the 3rd largest market for the United States, it's the 3rd largest overseas market for the United States. It's comprised of 10 countries. I think I could probably rattle them off here. Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. I did. And it's a big group of countries. The population is about 650 million people. It's about twice the size of a little more than twice the size of the United States. Its GDP is about $3 trillion, so it's very significant. As you'll see as we get into this a little more, it's a very important place for the United States to do business. We actually have more investment in ASEAN than we do in China. Almost 3 times as much investment in Southeast Asia as we do in China. Almost 10 times as much investment in Southeast Asia as we do in India, which surprises a lot of people because those places are big countries in the news all the time. ASEAN doesn't always make the news, at least not for business reasons. But with that set of countries, there's a lot going on. And as those of you who visited the region know, it's a very diverse set of countries. So it has almost every type of political regime. There are different religions. There are Muslim countries. There are countries that have majority Christian, Catholic in the case of the Philippines, and there are countries that are still led by communist regimes, socialist regimes like the Lao and the Vietnamese. But together, this group of countries has decided to work together and form a common market. The leaders of ASEAN have decided that they should bind together and form one ASEAN. So they're not using the European model per se, but they do have a vision for a common and free ASEAN market. That would include an ASEAN free trade area, which is very interesting to American companies because of all those consumers. It's also interesting from an investment point of view, because if you invest in one of the ASEAN countries, you can work across borders and sell into other ASEAN countries. That's very helpful. And I'll talk a little bit about ASEAN's geostrategic importance and its position in the world strategically, which is very important, and the economics is the basis of that. ASEAN also, through its ASEAN Charter, has a vision for a common political entity, political and security entity, so they try to coordinate together on security issues. That's also very important to the United States, as a lot of you have been reading in the papers, and I'm sure Ambassador Roy, for those of you who were here when he spoke, would have delved into. There's a strong ISIS presence now, or a nascent ISIS presence in the southern Philippines. We have had militant Islamic, fundamental Islamic terrorism in several of the ASEAN countries, probably most notably in Indonesia, the Bali bombing and the bombing in the hotels in Jakarta. The countries in the region are very concerned about this. They are coordinating closely with the United States on these issues. It's a top priority issue for their countries and for ours. So that's an important area of cooperation. And of course, ASEAN, from a security perspective, four of the ASEAN countries have some, or three, I should say, three of the ASEAN countries have some specific interest as claimants in the South China Sea set of issues, which you probably read about if you're looking at Asia and security issues. Brunei, Malaysia, actually four of them, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. They all have claims, territorial and maritime claims in the South China Sea, along with China and Taiwan. And that is it's probably one of the most important security issues of our time. It does, again, relate to economics, because the South China Sea, freedom of navigation in the South China Sea is extremely important to the United States, because a very large percentage, almost 75% of world trade, actually goes over those seas, on the seas, I should say. The rest of it goes, to a large extent, goes over the seas in airplanes. So it's very important what happens there. And we'll talk about this a little more soon. China's view is that, has been that the United States is not going to draw red lines in the South China Sea. They have spent the last decade increasing their presence in some of those islands, actually building up some of those islands. And they now have begun to put military aircraft and naval facilities onto some of those islands, so that it projects Chinese power into Asia, into the South China Sea. And this has been one of the hardest policy issues for the United States to cope with, because we are not a claimant in any way to territorial or maritime claims in the seas, but we do have, as I mentioned, a very real interest in protecting our treaty allies in Southeast Asia, which are the Philippines and Thailand, and also we have a very real interest in keeping those sea lanes of communication and trade open. And that is, you could argue that is being challenged by the Chinese approach to the South China Sea. I kind of want to bring this home too, because I think when you're working in Congress, I know that you guys are reading constituent mail. You're worried about what's in it for the people of your district, of your state, for Americans, and I think there's a lot to that, and I want to sort of touch on some of those items before I go into a little more of the geostrategic aspects of this. So why does ASEAN matter at home? And this is a speech, by the way, I wish some of your members would make. I wish President Trump would talk about this. I wish President Obama would have talked about it. But ASEAN is absolutely critical to the economic future of the United States. As our third largest trading partner, our ability to be able to trade and invest there is absolutely critical to future economic growth in the United States. And what does that mean at home? That means jobs. If we can't access these markets, which are the world's fastest growing markets, by the way, with 650 million people, the ASEAN region is growing at about 6.5%, meaning that right now it's growing a little slower than India, but it's got a much bigger U.S. investment base, and it's growing a little faster than China, which is also significant, and it's easier to do business right now than in either of those places. So that's very important for the United States. So jobs at home. The second thing is security. If we don't have a strong presence in Southeast Asia and good relationships with these countries, I would argue that U.S. security is at risk. And I think the most near-term example is the South China Sea. If China continues to believe that the United States is going to be focused on internal issues, if it's not going to be play the role that it has played since World War II in Asia, that of guarantor of security, I think that what's clear is that China has intentions that are very, I think, transparent. That China wants to be the organizer and the leader of economic integration across Asia, and if it does that, it will set Chinese standards. It will drive and has used economic power to drive its own sovereign interests in the region. For instance, in the South China Sea, it has had confrontations and disagreements with the Philippines, and it has used economic boycotts of the Philippines to try to force the Philippines to let go of its claims or step back from their what the Chinese assumed was a fairly aggressive approach. That scares the heck out of other Southeast Asian countries, because what I think Southeast Asia as a group wants more than anything else is geopolitical and economic balance. They want options. I mean, this makes sense, right? Put yourself in their shoes. They're a collection of relatively small countries, although Indonesia is the fourth largest country in the world and it anchors ASEAN. They imagine if China was your northern neighbor, and China was the world's economy with the most economic momentum, and China had a vision for global integration and regional integration, and China was starting to create institutions that would lead in your region the financing of infrastructure. It has the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. What if it had a vision for connecting your countries and through China to Europe? It has the One Belt, One Road initiative that you've heard of, OBOR. What if China was using its economic muscle to put pressure on you not to back off of your own sovereign claims? What your people and what by law you think is your territory and your fishing rights and your rights to develop energy. That's happening too. So Southeast Asia very much wants balance. And I think their perspective is that the United States, after this election, they're not sure what to think. They're not sure whether the United States is going to turn inward, whether we will continue to be a good trading partner, whether we'll invest and honor our treaty alliances to our 5 treaty allies in Asia, being Japan, Australia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Korea. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on the mindsets of policymakers across Southeast Asia. As Angeline mentioned, both she and I spend about half of our time or more in Southeast Asia, talking with the leaders there, people who run companies, people who run the countries. And I will tell you that there is, from Hanoi to Jakarta to KL to Singapore, there is real concern about what are we going to do as the United States? Because if we cede our role, they believe that the Chinese will run rampant over the region. They will organize the way Asian economic integration proceeds. They will organize the linkages of supply chains. They will organize how regional infrastructure connects, so that's sea, land, and air connections. And if that happens, the United States will be standing by watching growth in the world's the region with the best demographics, the most opportunity for growth and innovation in the world, and we will be playing catch up. So there's a lot at stake out in this region. In fact, geopolitically, I think we can say that as we approach the first quarter of the 21st century, the geopolitical center of the world, and if you wanted to draw the bullseye for where the action is going to be in the century that you will be leaders in, is where the Indian and the Pacific Oceans meet, and that is Southeast Asia. That is exactly where Southeast Asia is located. Indonesia itself is an archipelago of 17,000 islands, actually connects the Pacific and the Indian Oceans. The sea lanes are the straits that ships and submarines and other things that float or go underwater that connect those 2 oceans all go through Southeast Asia, the Malacca Straits, the Sunda Straits. And so this is a very economically and geopolitically important part of the world, very important for the United States. I guess what I wanted to tell you about is a little bit about how the Southeast Asians are thinking about the United States right now. And this is, I am not, by the way, I know all of you guys, I guess by definition, or most of you would be partisans of one sort or another. I'm not. I've lived in this town for 30 years, but I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, and I know it probably makes me pretty boring up here. But what I'm about to say doesn't have any partisan focus, to be honest with you. I've spent a lot of time in the region recently, and the Southeast Asians are their assumptions, and I'm generalizing here, but I would say this is across discussions with leaders, foreign ministers, heads of state, finance ministers, trade ministers, most of the ASEAN countries. I think they think the United States is moving into a much more transactional approach to foreign policy. So a lot of the questions they're asking right now is like, what do we have to do to bring, to advance our relationship with the United States? Do we need to invest more? Do we need to, what sort of deal do we need to make with the White House? And I think they're focused on this deal making. They think that U.S. foreign policy is now stepping back from some of the Kennedy-like ideals of human rights and freedom of press and democracy. That's an assumption that they're making based on what they're hearing. I have warned them not to go too far with that thinking. It's not safe to sort of ignore those things if you want a good relationship with the United States, but it's a concern. I think they see the national security team that's been put together by President Trump as relatively strong. McMaster, Mattis, have good cred in Asia, a lot of it. But I think countries like China are trying to understand whether what they thought they saw under the Obama administration, which was they thought they saw space between what the White House was willing to do and what it was saying, and what the Pentagon was willing to do and what it was saying, and PACOM, which is the Pacific Command, which is based out in Hawaii. Sorry for those of you that do defense, it's sort of mind-numbingly obvious, but for those of you who might do trade, you might not know what PACOM is. And I think now they're wondering whether that space still exists, and that's probably a good thing, not to be sure. But I think what Southeast Asia believes is, while the United States is not, it's sort of uncertain about its foreign policy towards the region, they know that China is spending this year on its own politics, because it's, this year is the Party Congress that will happen in October or November. They know, or they think they know, like I think I know, that President Xi Jinping is going to come out of that Party Congress with a much stronger hand, and that China is going to be playing offense in 2018. And they're looking at the United States, and they see the special counsel and the Russia investigations in a divided country, and they wonder whether they're going to have to start to hedge their bets in a much more serious way and lean in and appease China for their very survival. The Chinese are offering a lot of money for soft loans, for infrastructure. They're offering more access to the Chinese market through the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement. They're offering vision and leadership through the One Belt, One Road initiative that basically links China and Asia through Southeast Asia and South Asia into Europe. It's a grand vision, actually. And they're starting to create new institutions, like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And these things, ladies and gentlemen, that the Chinese are starting to create, while we're focused on more domestic issues, are the underpinnings of a foundation that will be, I think Beijing's plan is to have a Sino-centric order in Asia for the rest of this century. And if this chapter of history finds us as policymakers sitting by and not understanding that, and not taking the opportunity that we see, which is really an open hand from our Southeast Asian friends and partners to work more closely with them. If we leave that hand ungrasped, I think we will all pay for it in our lives, and our children and our grandchildren will certainly be poorer and much less secure if that happens. I was going to go through, and maybe I'll just quickly go through some of the numbers here for you, and then some of the countries that make up ASEAN, because some of you may have country-specific questions, and that would be more fun for the rest of our time, I think. If you have questions, I'd love to answer those. And you can't see this slide, so that's pretty useless. But let me just, the highlights are that this shows that the United States has a very healthy trade and investment relationship with Southeast Asia. It backs up with numbers a little bit of my earlier assertions about the surprising dominance of U.S. investment in Southeast Asia, which means that we have, our private sector, our companies have a special advantage there right now that we should be taking advantage of. I'm going to just go through for you because I think it's interesting. The countries that make up ASEAN, and if any of these trigger questions that you have or links to your constituencies, it might be interesting. Brunei is the smallest of the ASEAN countries. It's got about 300,000 people. It is an Islamic country run by the Sultan of Brunei. It's in the news a lot lately because of the Sultan, as he gets older, has decided that part of his legacy should be piety. And he has asked his country and instructed his country, ordered his country to institute Sharia law. And I think that's got a lot of people worried, and it resulted in some protests of California hotels at the Bruneian zone. The Bruneians are fabulously rich because Brunei basically floats on a lake of oil and gas. But that oil and gas is running out, and they're trying to make a transition towards a more industrialized and service-oriented country. They are one of the claimants to the South China Sea, and they have been very good friends to the United States. But this is a good example of a country. And some of you, I don't think many people here would be old enough to remember the Iran-Contra situation, but the Bruneians actually were the ones who provided President Reagan in the White House, Oliver North, with money to buy the missiles for Nicaragua. So really interesting history here. They've been very good friends, but they are a good example of a country that's feeling very direct, very heavy pressure from Beijing, and I can see in business that this is resulting in a tilt towards China, and now starting to pull them away from us. Cambodia is run by just a charming guy named Hun Sen. You are going to get to go out and live there, right?
Yeah,
Next month.
Yeah.
Hun Sen is widely known as an authoritarian leader of Cambodia. Cambodians have had just recently elections, and Hun Sen's ruling party, the CPP, has lost ground to the opposition, the CNRP. And there's a real question about elections next year about whether Hun Sen will let those be free or fair. You're going to see a lot of human rights stories in the news about Cambodia. But the Cambodian economy is also, although it's small, is ticking along. It's actually one of the highest growth countries in the world. And it's a very touching nation to go visit, because for those of you who know Cambodia's horrific history, the genocide, the Khmer Rouge, they actually killed nearly over a third of their own people in the Khmer Rouge genocide, and it was a horrific piece of their history. And hope is coming back. We'll see what happens. Very interesting place. Indonesia is the largest of the ASEAN countries. It has got about half the population of ASEAN, with about 250 million people. It's half ASEAN's. It's nearly half ASEAN's economy too. So it's got a big GDP. And as I said, it's an archipelago, as you see here, of 17,000 islands that connects the Indian and the Pacific Ocean. That archipelago, if we put it over Europe, would stretch from London to Moscow, or if we put it over our country, it would be New York to LA. So it's a pretty big place. There's a lot of people there. It's got incredible demographics, very young country, very hopeful country, and Indonesians really believe it's their time. So they're led by a president who was elected from outside of the political structure. His name is Jokowi. He has an election to win, or try to win, for his second term in 2019. What's interesting here is that Jokowi will have to deal with two really ugly genies that have been let out of the bottle in the Jakarta governor races that happened 2 months ago. And the genies that were let out of the bottle were anti-Chinese sentiment, used as a political ploy in Indonesian politics, and anti-Muslim or anti-Christian sentiment, because the incumbent for Jakarta was a Christian Chinese who was wildly popular and was going to win this election until his competitors used these tools to beat him, and now he's in jail for blasphemy. Laos, we're gonna. Can I come back?
Do you want to wait for the end of the session to ask a question?
I'll just run through these quickly. Laos is a tiny landlocked country. It's like Vietnam, but it's about 20 years behind Vietnam in its development. Laos is really interesting because it's where China, the Chinese and the Vietnamese compete for hearts and minds and soft power, and I think that makes it a fascinating place. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Malaysia is run by a guy named Najib Razak. He's been in the paper for a big scandal, the 1MDB scandal, which found that he had nearly $700 million in his private bank account. The Wall Street Journal broke this story. The question was where that money came from. Money in Malaysian politics is not a new thing. This is, prime ministers before him have probably had accounts like this. Whether he was using it for himself or to fund his party, UMNO, is a question. He's going to have to face an election in the next 2 years. I think he'll probably win it. The incumbency in Malaysia is very strong. Najib has been a good friend to the Americans. Malaysia is a very good place to do business. They're a tech center in Asia, and again, a place we can talk about. Myanmar is, I think, one of the countries that the Obama administration feels most proud of. Their policy towards Myanmar. This is a place that I fell in love with when I was in college, and it's one of the reasons that I dedicated my career to Asia and Southeast Asia, because it was literally a kingdom that was closed down, and they were like hermits. The military had taken them literally out of the flow of world politics. It was along with North Korea and Syria, maybe who else? Maybe Cuba. It was one of the places where Americans really couldn't do business. And I told my kids, hopefully this will open by the time you are adults and can really do business there. And it actually happened several years ago. Burma decided that it would open, it would do political reforms and economic reforms to get back into the game, partially because they were so dependent on China, partially because they wanted to get back in their role as a leader in Southeast Asia, and partly because of very practical reasons. The general who was running the place didn't want the biggest, baddest general behind him to come across the bridge, as would happen often, and stamp out his interests and his family. So he basically cut a deal. That's a fascinating story. It's now run by Nobel laureate, or Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi, who's been up here at the Capitol. Many of you may have seen her when she was here. People are, in the human rights community, are disappointed with Aung San Suu Kyi that she has not been able to, or not been willing to step up and protect some of the minorities, particularly in a most high-profile way, the Rohingya people in Western Myanmar. The Philippines has another charming leader. President Duterte called President Obama the son of a whore. That was a great opening line, really helped the U.S. relationship, particularly at the time when the Philippines had the Chinese in court over the South China Sea. The Philippines actually won that case in the UN tribunal. Duterte has backed off the Philippines' interest in taking that case forward. Obviously, the Philippines is still interested in its territory, but he has been much more concessional towards China, trying to build relations with the Chinese. When President Trump was elected, Duterte decided that I think he would reset a bit because he was in deep trouble. He had really gone too far with the Chinese, and he's now pulled back quietly. He has allowed us to, the Filipinos and the Americans have implemented an agreement called the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA. And so we now are helping them modernize their military and building bases, helping them build bases around 6 places in the Philippines. There are 5 other sites that are online coming in, which is pretty interesting. So our Special Forces soldiers, folks, are in the fight in Mindanao. So you probably see this in the news. There's been a siege on a town in the southern Philippines. A lot of civilian casualties. We lost a couple guys, and the Philippine military has lost some people. So that's not going away soon. The Philippines is a really interesting place. President Trump has invited President Duterte to visit the United States. It'll be interesting to see if he comes. There's rumors that he'd come in September or October before President Trump goes to the Philippines in November for the ASEAN and East Asia Summit meetings. It's interesting to me because Duterte has sworn on his mother's soul that he would never step foot in the United States. Singapore is another good friend of the United States. It's a small country, but it is and I'm conscious that I'm sitting next to a former Singapore MFA staffer here. But Singapore has been, one of the smartest countries in the world. It has good relations with China, the United States, and other Asian countries. We have a free trade agreement with Singapore. Singapore's Prime Minister Lee, has also been invited to the United States by President Trump. He hasn't fully accepted that yet. I think he's trying to figure out when and if he should come. So that's interesting to watch. He'll come, I think. It's just a question of when. And Singapore has been a vital partner for us, not only in trade and economics, but in the security sense. Thailand is a treaty ally of ours. The Thais, we signed, it's our oldest treaty ally in Asia. The Thais offered war elephants to Abe Lincoln when he was fighting the Civil War. But the Thai relationship had gone into, I guess what I'd call a malaise, because the military took over control when they were worried that the king, who was then not well in the last couple of years, was about to die and pass away. There would be a succession, which has happened since. The coronation has not happened, but the king has passed away. The military believed it had to take control from a guy named Thaksin Shinawatra, who was a popularly elected Prime Minister of Thailand. And there's some great stories there about what was really going on behind the scenes if you're interested in it. The Thai Prime Minister will come, has been invited to the United States also by Trump. So you can see there's a mini Trump pivot to Southeast Asia going on. He will be here in early July for a visit. This is incredible because under the Obama administration, there was a freeze on sort of high-level visits. Certainly they wouldn't have invited the general who led the coup and turned over a democratically elected Prime Minister of Thailand, but President Trump has invited him, and he'll come this year. And finally, Vietnam, which I think is one of the great, really amazing stories. The Vietnamese Prime Minister has just been here in the last month. The Vietnamese, I think, are one of the most strategic thinking of the Southeast Asian countries right now. That's largely because they've spent 1,000 years fighting the Chinese and protecting their sovereignty from a country that's on their northern border that believes that Vietnam is essentially a province of China. And they've told the Vietnamese that recently, and that really worries the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese are probably the most vocal of the Southeast Asian claimants to the South China Sea. They have had bloody confrontations with the Chinese on those waters. The Vietnamese, I think, are one of the countries that is most urgently looking for ways to pull the United States into Asia, back into Asia, and secure a balance. And they're really worried about that. There's an interesting alliance that's been created over the last, I guess, 5 months. It's really involves the Vietnamese, the Japanese, the Australians, the Indians, and the Singaporeans to some extent. And these countries are working together to try to make arguments to the White House and to the Americans to stay engaged in Asia and not let China sort of organize the place. And I think the Vietnamese are part of the backbone behind that effort. So, sorry, I dragged you through a lot there. I wanted to sort of pour it over your head and see what was interesting to you, and I'll hand it back over to Angeline to moderate us.
Thanks, Ernie. A lot to unpack there. I think you've made a very convincing argument that the U.S. staying engaged in the region is of vital interest to the U.S. economically and strategically. So let's quickly take a bunch of questions. I know there's one burning question back there. Maybe we can start with that one.
Sure. Trent Bishop from Senator Gardner's office. So about 3 months ago, Vice President Pence visited Indonesia, and I saw that there were potential talks between him and the Indonesian president about possibly a bilateral trade agreement some sort with that country. Do you have any insight in that, if that's in the works and what that might look like?
Do you want to take a question?
Why don't we do this one and then we'll see how many more hands pop up.
Good. All right, Trent, good question. And I think since you offered it up, I think the Trump administration actually has been pretty robust in sending its leadership to Asia, right? I mean, so Mattis has been there a couple of times. Vice President Pence visited, as you mentioned, Indonesia. Tillerson has been out there several times. And I think there are other visits planned, so that's a good sign. I mean, I think McMaster's been in Asia also. Pence's visit to Indonesia and the trade agreement. The Indonesians are not interested right now in trade agreements with the United States, unless they have to be, and that's what they're trying to figure out. The Indonesians were not part of the TPP. They are part of the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement, and that because they joined that, the trade minister who brought them into that agreement was run out of her office, basically, because Indonesians didn't like the provisions in that free trade agreement, and they have not been fans of free trade. But the Indonesians are really worried because they are on the list of countries that have a trade deficit of over $10 billion with the United States. And the economic team and the foreign minister have been here recently trying to figure out if they need to do a trade agreement or some sort of an agreement with the Americans. What they've agreed in the short term to lead up to this, to have discussions about it, basically it's a delaying tactic, Trent, is they've agreed to have high-level talks at the Secretary of Commerce and Secretary of State level, which is a new format, and it would be, and they're saying it's to activate the U.S.-Indonesia strategic partnership, which was put in place under President Obama. So, you know, watch that space. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But I don't think you'll see a U.S.-Indonesia trade agreement anytime soon.
Thank you. Let's do, in the interest of time, let's do 3 questions, I think. So, guy over here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, you spoke about the role of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what your thoughts were about the role of government-owned businesses in China exerting influence throughout the region. Is it more of a private effort, or would you say it's a kind of a cohesive government-led effort?
Okay. Guy next to him.
Mine's a bit different. Okay, so you mentioned, so ASEAN might be tied together like economically, but it's not united politically. So you mentioned that there's like the geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China, but could you also elaborate between like some of the frictions between like Cambodia and Vietnam, or like the Vietnamese claiming the entire South China Sea as well, and their own rivalries with the other claimants, and how that might affect the unity of ASEAN?
Let's take one more.
Yes, I'm sure you get this question a lot, but what are the political ramifications of us getting involved in the South China Sea, and like the military ramifications, and especially long term?
Good questions, not surprising. I'll take them in order. I think on AIIP and the South, and what we call state-owned enterprises or state-owned companies in China, they do have a big influence in Southeast Asia, and Chinese. You know, we actually at CSIS we did a study on whether it was Chinese foreign policy, whether it was Chinese strategy, basically, to use the state-owned enterprises to invest in Southeast Asia.